Excellent. So I'm Michelle, and I'm really, really pleased to be with my two very good friends and colleagues, Ann Koerner and Kacy Seitz today. And so you have a lot of experience, a collective experience on this panel. And so we wanted to talk about this big, beautiful bill. I have a hard time saying that out loud because how it impacts the people that I advocate for, including my own daughter. And so, but today is not, I want to be very clear that today is not about fear mongering. It's really about what to look for, why we need to pay attention to this, and what are the things that you should be doing to help prepare for any kind of changes. And when we were preparing for this, one of the things that we all agreed on is that basically when the pendulum swings too far in one direction, it usually swings back. And we have seen these types of cuts before, correct? So without aging ourselves, we've been doing this for decades. I think we have many, many decades of experience between the three of us. And we've seen this before, correct? So one of the most pressing impacts that I see of the big, beautiful bill is that we just see a lot of cuts, all right? That's one of the mandates of this current administration is they want to, what they call cut the fat, but they're cutting programs. They want to kind of reinvent how governments or governs. And so we're seeing, I think, cuts that I've never seen in the past. And so to me, one of the biggest impacts is that there's going to be less people to answer the phone, less people to process applications. And that's one of the impacts that I see kind of happening now. And it really had more to do with COVID than it had to do with any of these legislative cuts because they haven't been around long enough to really have a direct impact that we're feeling at this point. So what I'm really referring to is Social Security more than anything. We just see less people available, people retired, and they haven't and don't intend on filling those slots. So, Ann, Kacy, what have you guys seen?
So I've done a survey. Some of you may know National Care Advisors is indeed a national company. So we have a very all 50 state perspective. To be honest with you, we've not seen anything yet that's major as far as any type of change in access or the rules or eligibility criteria or even authorization of services for existing clients. And I've polled all of our case managers across the country. Um, I do think it's important to note that there always have been some barriers. We always have had difficulty getting people on the phone, that there is a need for advocacy, that if you don't use the right form or you don't submit the right financial data or your doctor doesn't fill out the right medical data, that there are sometimes barriers that feel very daunting. I don't believe this bill changes any of that. I believe that we will still have those challenges. I think what's important is to know where to go in your community to find advocacy when you are finding a barrier to a benefit that you know you should be able to access for your loved one. And so we don't know until the states make their decisions about how they're going to impact the access to benefits based on what the federal government is doing. And just to back up a little bit, it's important to understand that Medicaid is actually an umbrella of programs. It's funded at a federal level. There are basic guidelines about what a state has to essentially offer. But then underneath that, the state it's actually administered, Medicaid is administered at a state and county level.
Mhm.
And so the funding is a combination of state dollars and federal dollars. We don't know what that looks like yet. And so it's very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen and which states are going to be able to make up some of the differences or not. There's also two different ways to access the Medicaid system. You can access it because you are low income, or you can access it because you are disabled. The federal big beautiful bill, the legislature has said at the in Congress and at the national level that they are really trying hard not to impact benefits for disabled individuals. They are very much focused on able-bodied individuals that are able to work, and of course, unfortunately, immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants. So right now, we don't know. But again, I think it's always important. I don't care, even before this big, beautiful bill, so important to know where do you go to get advocacy services, whether that's through a local nonprofit, through a case management company, through an attorney, through even if you've got a really trusted financial planner, they'll have usually in their toolbox some folks that they can refer you to. So those are my thoughts on what's happening right now. Right now, we're sitting tight, waiting to see what gets announced next.
Exactly. So, Kacy, as the financial professional and also a parent of a medically complex young woman, why why should families and professionals be paying attention to what's going on with this bill?
I think now, again, more than ever, is a really good time to build your team, if you will. And we talk about team a lot in terms of the different strategic partners you need to do this type of planning. So many families we meet on a daily basis haven't done that basic step. They haven't put their estate plan in place. They have not created a financial plan for themselves to be financially secure, sans the long-term dependency. And they have not educated themselves, like Anne said, about what are all the benefits available to my child and where do I go to get those services. And even more importantly, on top of all of the normal care coordination we as parents do, which is a 24/7 job. It could be its own full-time job, right? And we talk about that so much. Um, it does feel really overwhelming, but this is where the team is so important. If you have a good estate planning attorney, you have a good resource for benefits expertise and education, and you have a holistic special needs financial planner, and I'm not talking about just an investment advisor, I'm talking about someone who's going to coordinate with these other team members to help you get this plan in place, then you are already in a better position to withstand changes that are possibly going to happen in terms of these different government supports. So just like in investing, we don't ever know what the market's going to do day to day, but we always have a plan for whatever direction it's going to go. So if you don't have your backup plan, you don't have a plan B or even a plan C in my case, because our daughter requires 24/7 care. She's in a wheelchair. She had a significant brain injury at birth. We rely very heavily on things like in-home nursing for some of her supports through our waiver in our state. And I'm not going to lie, it is scary right now because you see things like headlines around Medicaid funding cuts and HCBS being optional services in every state. It's very scary for families like mine because without that in-home nursing, our private insurance does not cover 10 to 12, sometimes $15,000 a month of what that would cost to replace.
Kacy,
And it's
can I
it's a
can I
lot.
interrupt you just for a second and kind of explain what waiver you've mentioned a couple of terms, and I know that we all speak this language, but not everyone on this
Yeah.
webinar may. Can you just briefly describe kind of what waiver means in
Yeah.
HCBS or home and community-based services?
So home and community-based services, like Ann said, is part of that umbrella of Medicaid. And every state has different types of waivers. There can be an autism waiver. Sometimes there's a brain injury waiver. You qualify for these waivers based on the type of diagnosis and the qualifying factors to those waivers in your state. Every state's waivers are funded at the state level, sometimes at the county level. So it is really important that you're educated on, okay, well, which waiver applies to my child or my adult that I'm supporting? And what are the services that that waiver then is supposed to be providing our family? So that could probably be a whole other webinar all by itself, because
It
that
definitely could.
system, yeah, that system alone can be really complicated. And oftentimes families confuse the word Medicaid with a Medicaid waiver, which technically are two different things.
Mhm.
And Anne
Absolutely.
can probably speak more to that, but her and I go round and round about if they could just call it something else, I think it would be
Right.
make our lives a lot easier.
Yeah,
But a
and the
waiver is
waiver,
access to Medicaid when you're disabled, but maybe it waives the financial requirement to getting traditional Medicaid. So for example, my husband and I, we earn an income that's too high for us to get traditional Medicaid. But our daughter, Hudson, gets a Medicaid waiver because it waives our income and assets and focuses on her disability and qualifications. And then that waiver provides her supports in the community, HCBS.
exactly. And home and community-based service waivers, the HCBS stands for Home and Community-Based Service Waivers. That is mandated by the federal government. All states must have that program underneath their Medicaid umbrella of programs. As Kacy said, but the states have some they can have different criteria for what is a disabling condition. And so just because you're awarded a waiver doesn't mean you're going to get the same set of services as someone in a different state, different county, or sometimes even in the same city with the same needs. So there's an assessment piece of it that would define how many authorized, for example, hours of home health aid services you might get. And that's very specific to the individual who has been awarded the waiver and also the funding that's available in your particular community, geographic area, bottom line.
So, so
Again,
when you
we don't know what's going to happen with this big, beautiful bill. Again, officially, the word is they're not touching that level of funding. But there are other programs that kind of support the waiver program that may result in some cuts, and we don't know how the states are going to be looking at that overall in the overall system. I will say one thing: if you're ever reluctant to sign up or have a client sign up for services, you will never be offered any help if you're not enrolled in the system. So even though it's a pain to do it, enrollment is the first step to understanding whether there is help available through any Medicaid program, to be honest with you. And then from there, you go to authorized hours. And we don't know right now, we're not seeing any cuts across the board in authorized services or hours. That has not been published. We're not seeing anecdotally that that's happening. By the way, anytime you're in a government program, there will be letters and official notification. They don't just cut things. It is extremely important that you open your mail, that you read your mail, that your clients, if you're a professional, that your clients are providing you with the letter, because often it is not just an arbitrary cut of services. It's because they're missing a piece of paper from a bureaucratic standpoint that allows them to continue the level of service that's been authorized for your loved one. So whether that's a financial document or a medical justification, those rules are not changing because of this big, beautiful bill. So we'll see. I think in 26 we'll have some clarity. But right now, I think the states are all trying to figure out what's going to happen next.
I think one of the things that I see that families can do is just what I would have recommended even before this bill, which is one is watch things like this, become armed with information and education as to what is out there. The issue is that there's no menu. Like when you leave the hospital with a child with disabilities, or you're going to the doctor and you have a diagnosis, nobody sits down with you and says, here's all the things that you may be entitled to. And these are what these services provide. So unfortunately, that's where you have to do the investigation and work with professionals that are in this space that can help bring resources to bear. And so what Anne and Kacy said is absolutely true, which is get into the system, enroll. And what I see is a little fatigue, right? Not just a little, but sometimes people will apply and there's a missing piece, or they're denied benefits, but they don't really explain why. Like, what was the defect? And that prevents them from getting services. And it could be the right doctor's report. And so what we see a lot is like there might be missing pieces, especially if you're doing this yourself and you have to, maybe you're not real comfortable with tech and you have to upload documents. This is what professionals are for. There are a whole host of nonprofits that exist for these services. Like one near me is the Disability Network. They're fantastic. And so sometimes there's not money to, support retaining an hourly professional. And the nonprofit world out there, that's what they're designed to do. And that's one of the nonprofits that I lean on, especially for an appeal. And so when people get some of these letters and they may have, let's say, a reduction of hours, or there's something in there, or they get a letter and they're not really sure what it means. There's a couple things. One is it can look like junk mail. Two, they're not always clear, and watch for deadlines, because sometimes the deadlines are in itsy bitsy print in a corner of the document. And so make sure that you're responding in time. And as Anne said, there's always, it's usually in writing. I can't say 100%. Sometimes things get lost in the mail, but they never really take an action without, I can't even say never, but rarely will they take action without giving proper notice. And so I want to make sure that people understand that these are benefits that exist, and you can't get them if you don't apply. And I have to say that a lot of it is you have to outstubborn the system. You have to just keep applying and get to rally resources so that your child or loved one that you're advocating for gets the services that they're entitled to. So Maddie, I see a hand raised.
We just had a comment that said it was great information about the waivers. Very thankful you talked about that.
Oh, lovely.
Well, and to
That's
that note, just to add on, Michelle, I think
Yeah.
learning the language of the system you're trying to navigate is like its own little masterclass,
Correct.
you know, and we often talk about all these acronyms, every industry has acronyms. The disability world has so many. And I even still get frustrated. I've been a member on our state's Developmental Disabilities Council in the past, and I would have to sit and raise my hand and say, what is, NACDD? What is that? I don't know what that is. Can someone explain it? So ask those questions, because until you really understand what the words are, or who to talk to, or who your different centers of influence are for where you're trying to go, it will be incredibly more difficult.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that I think actually kind of brings us back to the big beautiful bill is a term that we hear a lot, especially if you're working to appeal anything, is called priority and urgency of needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is sometimes in some states they call it a PUNS list. So in states that have a wait list, it's not that you actually get your benefits based on where you are on that wait list. There is also another factor, which is priority and urgency of needs. And very simply, what that means is if let's say you're a single parent household with a child that requires 24/7 care and has a G tube and suctioning and all kinds of skilled nursing needs, your child is going to get more services quicker and much more generous than a family that has a two-parent situation with one parent staying home full time and perhaps a higher income level. And so that priority and urgency of need is very important as you're communicating with anyone in the government, and that includes case managers, assessment, anybody who is actually getting a salary from the government who's talking to you about benefits. Having the language, as Kacy's saying, to know how to express exactly what the priority and urgency of need is for your loved one is so important. I could tie that back to the big beautiful bill, where obviously our elected officials have decided that they're going to have to prioritize, that we don't have an unlimited pot of money. This is just a generalization of what I think is going through their heads. Who knows, really? But certainly the thought is that while the government is a safety net, it has never been intended to be everything for all people.
Mhm.
And so certainly the party that's in power today has decided that they have to prioritize what is happening and who gets services within the scope of what they feel can be funded through government resources, tax money, et cetera, right? There's not an unlimited ability to tax. There's not an unlimited ability to pay providers. Now, whether, again, that's politically, I don't have the answer to any of those things. But it's also like when folks say, how can you possibly live on supplemental security income? One of the things that I have to point out on a regular basis is the word supplemental security income. Our forefathers and our government never, whoever decided to set up the Social Security system, didn't ever really believe that you could live on SSI, supplemental security income, but they realized that if you were disabled, you needed more resources than what you could possibly earn. And so the government was going to provide assistance, not 100%, but assistance. I believe right now that is how Congress is looking at Medicaid, that it is an assistance, that it is the final safety net. They've obviously prioritized citizens over non-citizens. That is what it is. They're also obviously in this big, beautiful bill prioritizing that those folks that can work should work, whether that makes sense or not, and what are the other factors about why they're not working is going to be yet to be seen how they implement that.
And I wanted to pause there for a minute because I think that one of the things that we see in the news a lot are the work requirements for people on Medicaid.
Go to your next.
So I wanted to clarify that when you have a disability determination by a governmental agency, whether it's your state agency or the federal government through Social Security, it means that you can't work, right? That's what that disability determination means. So just to take a step back, the definition of disability means that your impairment, your mental or physical condition is such an impairment or affects you to the point where you cannot earn substantial gainful activity. So that's one of the buzzwords, right? SGA, substantial gainful activity. And that means in 2025 that you can work but you cannot earn $1,620 a month or more, which is what they think is the bar, right? Which is very low, like $400 a week.
Set by Social Security, by the way.
Set by Social Security, thank you. So that means that you have a determination by a government agency that you have a condition, which means that you cannot work. And so I just want to clarify that when you hear in the news work requirements, you're going to have to prove that you're trying to work in order to get Medicaid. We're talking about people who are able-bodied, who do not have a disability determination and don't have health insurance. This is for them to keep their health insurance. This is not about waiver programs. So I know, again, this is where the confusion in the naming of benefits and the types of benefits come in. And so I just want to, I don't know if you guys have anything else to add to that, but that's where I'm seeing incredible confusion and concern among my clients. That they're concerned that, do I have to go work now in order to keep my Medicaid? No.
So again, there's two ways to enter the Medicaid system, as I said. One is because you're low income. The other is because you're disabled. In some cases, it's been our experience that the path of least resistance is to put you into the bucket that is low income, and you'll get your Medicaid and then eventually perhaps a waiver down the road, especially if you're in a state that has a wait list. But they'll give you Medicaid right away because you're low income. They might not in their computer system also designate you as disabled. That is super important. And that's what Michele's really saying here. It is very important to have that disability designation, as that's the way that you're accessing your Medicaid program, because then you will not have any of those work requirements. In order to get a disability determination, the quickest way is to go through the Social Security system, to be honest with you. That makes things a lot simpler when you get over to Medicaid, because they've already determined, the federal government has already determined that you meet the criteria as being disabled. Now, we realize that can be very difficult for individuals with mental illness diagnoses. It's a much higher bar than it is for individuals that have perhaps developmental disability or a significant visible physical disability. And so that's important, again, that you have the right documentation. It's not enough to just have a diagnosis, although I will say one of the positive things is that this past week, Social Security added some more presumptive diagnoses. If you apply with a certain diagnosis, you will automatically be deemed to be in the disability category as opposed into the low income. And so there are some positives here in that they're trying to make it a little easier and more streamlined. Although, again, that's so important that your physician or whoever is submitting the medical determination about disability or the documentation that supports disability, that they talk about the actual functional disability that precludes you from working in any capacity. It's super important. That means you can't even do a Walmart greeter job. What is the functional reason why you cannot work? And that will move you over into that disabled category. And again, it's always hard to be labeled, but when you're working with the bureaucracy, labels are what they are. If it gets you a better resource, go with it. Doesn't matter what they call you, sticks and stones, they're not gonna hurt you, and it's probably going to get you some
Yeah.
access. Same
It
with
just,
one of the other frustrations, and I think in the big beautiful bill, I know there's been a lot about, oh my gosh, every 6 months they're going to ask us to recertify. We have to submit information. Well, prior to COVID, about once a year, you had to submit information anyway, and then they extended it to every 2 years. I believe that every 6 months is probably going to again be more for folks that are in the low income category than in the disabled income. I will tell you that we have all been frustrated. Like, for example, if you have a child with Down syndrome, to have to periodically, you'll get a letter that says, does your child still have Down syndrome? Duh, like it seems like a really stupid requirement. But that's the way the government's computer systems are programmed. And so you've got to submit that documentation that, yes, my child still has Down syndrome, right? Unfortunately, we didn't find the way to fix that yet. So you're frustrated, but you got to play the game if you want to get the resources from the government. It is what it is at this point. Big Beautiful Bill's not really changing that, I don't believe, for disabled individuals. You are going to have to recertify on a regular basis.
Well,
and
I'll add into that too. We're on the medically complex waiver for our daughter in Kansas. It's an every 6 month cert.
Yeah.
Our care coordinator has to physically see her in our home every 6 months. That's been since the beginning of when we were on the waiver. And it's been my experience in most of the Midwestern states, at least, because that's where most of my families live, that that's the case. By the way, I think that's an opportunity for caregivers to form a better relationship with your care coordinator, because guess what? That's the person who has the education and access to all the waiver services for you and your family. Ask them, talk to them.
Right.
Learn about the other services that as your child gets older, what changes. How about when Hudson becomes 21 in my state, she graduates to a different waiver? It's an
Adult waiver.
automatic transition, but I didn't know that until I asked the question. And that was from Anne, because she's like, oh, by the way, you're not going to have this waiver for her whole entire lifetime. I'm like, what? What do you mean? I didn't even know that, right? And I'm in this every day, all day. So I think it's an opportunity for you to really, again, get educated on the system you're in. But can I switch here a little bit, Michele? I want to
yeah,
go back and reinforce the point Anne made about families, especially in this really polarizing time. And I'm just going to state that. I'm going to be blunt about that. It's a very polarizing time, both politically and in a lot of other ways. We don't do financial planning only around Social Security retirement income. So why in the world would we ever do financial planning for a person with a disability or a long-term dependent with only government benefits? I hate to say this, but I do meet some families that the parents are living on those services and supports either as caregiver income because they are genuinely entitled to that, but they're counting on that for their retirement income as well. And I don't think that's a great way to plan. I also don't agree that only having Social Security is a great way to live in retirement. So we all, in my opinion, need to have a multitude of options and choices, and that requires saving a little bit more. It might mean you want to do a little bit different planning in terms of your legacy planning. So maybe we're increasing things like life insurance because we need more money going into a special needs trust. And we're not going to depend on only government services for the rest of that child's lifetime because of what's happening right now. So It does, in my opinion, it's never a better time than now or even tomorrow than to engage with a really good holistic special needs financial planner, and we can help you find resources to locate one in your area. But depending on caregiver income as your source, even for the non-working parent, forever is not a good plan. I would say that even if all of these services were well funded right now and working perfectly, which they're not, and they never will be.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And one of the sayings that I've always, when I work with families is, what the government giveth, the government can take away.
Right.
Anytime you're relying on a third party, the more independent you can be of benefits, the better off. Now, that being said, as Michele said before, without saying exactly how many years I've been doing this, I have seen government programs be implemented, funded, unfunded, named, renamed. They come, they go. I firmly believe the Affordable Care Act may at some point be renamed totally, but I also think that there are some things that are so universally appreciated by the citizens of the United States that we're not getting rid of that the diagnosis pre-exclusion. So that was a huge improvement for all of us when we could, you don't not have insurance because you happen to have a diabetes diagnosis before you actually bought the insurance, right? So that I think that's going to stay. I can't imagine that our congressmen want to be not elected because the whole country is like, what do you mean you're taking away something that is a rule that makes a big difference to everyone? But I mean, I'm hopeful on that. I guess that's my opinion. That's not, I haven't actually talked to a congressman about that, but I do know they're very interested in getting reelected. And I also know that some of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act are extremely well accepted by the citizens of the United States. In the big, beautiful bill, some of the tax benefits are going away. Some of the support for premium going away. That's going to be an interesting problem, but something that we'll deal with when we see exactly how it's implemented. Again, those marketplaces are state and county down to the zip code level specific, and we know that's in the big beautiful bill. Premiums, by the way, are going up. Even if they left those protections in, we've seen the premiums for health insurance go up anyway. We're I'm not sure how the health insurance industry and Congress are going to, at some point, figure out how people can have access to good health care. Again, above my pay grade, but that is something to be aware of. And Kacy's point is that it does affect a budget. And so, wherever we need on a personal level to make some changes so that we can still have the protection of health insurance, we need to plan for that. And we'll see where it all lands when Congress is done doing what they're doing and the states adjust for marketplace health insurance as well.
I wanted
Go ahead.
to switch gears just a little bit to school and IDEA and special education services. So what we're seeing is that they, in the bill, they want to dismantle the Department of Education and a lot of the protections under IDEA, including budgeting and special education services. What should we talk about there? What should parents and families look for? One of the things that still kind of shocks me is that sometimes families with severely disabled children tend to be isolated, right? They'll just do, right? They'll do the education in home. They'll, because no one has talked to them about what they may be entitled to. And that exists today. And this isn't after any kind of rollout of budget cuts and reduced staffing to deliver these types of services. So, Kacy, why don't you talk a little bit about IDEA and what it's supposed to provide, and what you see is how do we prepare for budget cuts or reduced services in our school? What can we do?
Yeah, I'll come at this from a state that is very underfunded in terms of special education. I think we're at a 40% level or something in the state of Kansas and have been there a really long time. So my expectations as a special needs parent going into the education, especially the public education system here, I have kind of a low bar. But IDEA is really supposed to provide accommodations for a child who has a disability, a qualifying disability that's medically documented, to access the public education system in a way that is appropriate for them so that they can receive a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. That's what it does, right? So that can be, like Anne said, just a really big variety of in terms of outcomes inside the education environment. I do know that with a child like Hudson, where when she was in preschool, there were a lot more services provided then, and even in the birth to 3 program for her outside of school than there are now. So as she's gotten older, she's now almost 15. She has a fantastic team at her high school. She's a freshman this year, by the way. It's weird saying that, Anne, because I think when I met you, she was 6, right?
Yeah.
Her physical therapy hours that are approved on her IEP are much less than they were when she was in preschool. And that is in part because that funding has to go to support so many children across that district or education system. And she is at a place now where we're not making her better with physical therapy. She's not getting better. The brain injury is not going away. We are supplying it so she can access different learning environments pretty much tied to some type of education goal in her IEP. So I think sometimes, and I don't want to say this in a negative light, but I think sometimes as parents, we really are expecting the level of what private therapy would provide in the school system, and that's just unrealistic. If you want private therapy, then go get that. Use your waiver to go pay for that, or your private insurance to pay for that, and have that as an outside of school thing. But I don't expect a lot in terms of things like OT, PT, and speech, other than when it's tied to her educational goals in the education environment. I hope that's okay to say.
I
Well,
think that
and
was,
by law, the schools, any type of therapy has to be tied, and you mentioned that, tied directly to an education goal.
Right.
So if the goal is that the child will walk, that is not tied to an education goal. Now,
So
is the
to make
goal,
that point, Anne, we have our number one goal since she had her brain injury was proactive communication
right?
in the education
Yeah,
environment with her peers and non-typical peers, right? So we get a lot more speech
right.
and OT support around her communication device. That's what I want. That's what I want them focusing on while she's there.
Yep, yep. And I think, maybe this is going to focus on achievable goals. We know across the United States that there is a huge, vast difference between quality education. Again, even within a city,
Yes.
right? Public school districts are not funded equally. They've never been funded equally. We have a mismatch of how public schools, sometimes in some states it's property taxes, in some states it's other types of taxes. Then there's the lottery money. God knows where that actually ends up, and does it do anything in those states that have said that lottery is going to fund education. And again, with the changes at the Congress level, or at the, I'm sorry, at the national level, um, are the changes that there's going to be more control at a local level? Are they, is the funding, we don't know the final funding that's going to be those cuts and what they're going to look like yet. It's going to be very interesting to kind of watch and see. Certainly everybody's braced that the fact that, again, that there's going to be a pullback. Um, you know, the only outcome that I could see that would be a positive is that less in administration and less in high salaries and less in maybe some positions that aren't actually making a difference for the children, and maybe redirecting money back to a local level where that can actually happen. But I'm not going to say that there's not going to be cuts at the federal level with funding for school districts. I don't know that that's going to happen. Now, the
I
law hasn't
agree, Anne.
changed though. Michelle, can I give it back to you though? But the
Yeah,
idea, the law has not changed relative to what the rights of a disabled child have for a free and appropriate public education in the United
absolutely.
States. And
Yeah.
so I think, please talk a little bit about advocacy again and what the law says.
Yes, I think that, first you have to know that it exists, that your child is entitled to these benefits, and you have to ask for them. You have to hold the school system accountable and say that my child has special needs, they have a diagnosis, they're entitled to this, to accommodations. And so what I see is that those services are being cut or cut back, reduced. And so as you pointed out, some of this is federal funding. A lot of this funding for these programs comes from the state. And like you said, Anne, there are disparate communities where some are better funded than others, where you see a better tax base,
Yeah.
more services, right? We know this. Now, can you afford to live there? It's maybe not, right? And so does that mean that your school district doesn't have to provide those services? The answer is no, they do, they must. And so, but they won't if you don't ask,
Right.
if you don't persist. And so there are resources available. There are, if you join, at least in my local, like the 3 main counties in the Detroit area where I live and work, ARC services, ARC of Western Wayne, ARC of Macomb, ARC of Oakland, for $50 a year, one of the benefits that you get is special education advocacy. And a lot of people don't know that that is part of what they offer. And that is a key component to their services and coordination and what they do. And so that's just one resource where if you're not quite sure, you don't know what to ask for, they can come in and help you advocate. And so, yes, absolutely look at that, make sure that your child is getting what they should. So I want to come back to a point that Kacy made, which was something I run into quite a bit, which is that people are looking to the school districts to provide medical services. So OT, PT, speech, when it's delivered by a school district, and it has to be geared toward education, right? So I don't want to belabor that because I think both, Anna and Kacy made that point. But where parents get confused, I think, is because they are delivering speech services, physical therapy, and occupational therapy. And is that a medical service? Well, yes, but it has to do with an educational goal. And so personally, also having gone through this with my daughter, the school district provided like a half an hour and it was group therapy, right? And it was tied to an educational goal. When we went to a hospital-based therapy, it was one-on-one and it was an hour long, several times a week. And so what we tended to see where advances or progress happened was there first, then it showed up at home, then it showed up at school. And so we also and this was when we went through these services, this was before anything was really covered for autism, speech therapy, OT was covered, physical stuff was covered, but none of the executive functioning support was offered or covered under our health insurance. And so we got help from the Lions Club. We got help from the Easter Seals. We got help, and that help still exists. And so if you were feeling frustrated where you're like, well, I don't know what I'm even entitled to, and how do I fight for these benefits? How do I get them for my child? That's where your local ARCs, your nonprofits, your special needs professionals. So we have a nurse, case manager, we have a financial planner, and an attorney we all handle different aspects and we all collaborate perhaps on the same client to do different things. And so this is where Kacy and Anne and I have talked about assembling your team, your go-to. Yes, the more resources you have, the more access you have to these types of professionals. Absolutely. Is that fair? No, but that's the reality. So this is where nonprofits and other organizations exist for that purpose, right? To also help. So that's where your local ARCs, Disability Network. Look on in Google, your state, Disability 101 is a great website. It doesn't cover all states, but it does have a comprehensive list of services that your state may provide if it's one of the states that are covered under that website. But also your state website has a lot of information.
I'm going to hop in real quick.
Yeah.
We just have a comment from an attendee. Our young adult program just cut program hours by 30 minutes, and they're worried that more program hours will be taken away. Do you have any advice that you could give the attendee?
I think that one is talk to the school district and see why the program has been cut, what the hours have been cut. Is it because of a change that in your particular child's circumstance, or is it just that the funding isn't available? The other thing I would look at is talk to your local representatives and if for your local school district to see if there's a bond measure. I can only think that if the federal dollars shrink, if your state has or your local authority has an investment in making sure that people have services and access to services, I wouldn't be surprised to see bond measures getting floated. It may not be popular, but that might be one of the answers, is that they're shifting responsibility from the federal government to the state and even to private individuals.
I would also, if this is a young adult program, so they're out of over 22, so it's not a school program. I'm assuming maybe they're referencing the person who's asking the question is maybe referencing a day program, a young adult day program or something along those lines, and they cut back a half an hour. It's usually staff costs. That's the usual reason that we see those types of things happen. The first thing that I would say is ask for some more respite care and see if you can't. Another program, another benefit can take up that extra half hour that you now have a young adult who needs supervision, who needs something to do, who needs some care, and see if you can't request that half an hour, especially if that day program was enabling a parent to work. Oftentimes that is a very good priority and urgency of need. That parent can't now take another half hour off work. But if you ask for more respite hours, perhaps you can get some funding, maybe 5 more hours a week that will allow you to hire someone to provide the supervision that's needed for that extra half an hour. That's where you have to know, for example, under the developmental disability services, I please know that I realize we're speaking maybe to an audience from many different states, but there's supported living services, independent living services, respite, there's day programs, there's just a lot of different programs underneath, again, the umbrella of developmental disability services even. So I keep talking about umbrellas, but programs underneath it. And sometimes when those types of changes happen because they don't have the money for staffing, which is, I'm pretty almost positive that's probably why they're cutting back a half an hour. That's a relatively minor change, but it can make a big difference in the budget. And so I would then be talking immediately, as Kacy said, to the case manager. Hopefully you have a case manager assigned, and asking, okay, where can you help me with this additional half hour or hour that you've now taken away so that I can still continue to work and support my household, because that's essential as well, because you're providing, your young adult is living underneath your roof and someone's got to pay the mortgage. So those are comments that we have a lot of success with, quite frankly. Asking for 5 more hours of respite might not be out of the realm of what they could approve. You never know. So
I'll jump in here too, Anne, because one of the responses was good idea, but sadly finding workers is impossible.
well, that has nothing to do, please, for everyone. We've got a problem in the United States. And we had a caregiver problem before COVID. It became critical in crisis in COVID. Nobody wants to do that work. Nobody still wants to do that work. We work in jurisdictions where the rate is up to $30 to $35 an hour on a private pay basis, and we still can't find people willing to be aides and supervisory staff for people with disability and mental illness. So it's a problem. It's an immigration problem. I'm going to be honest. We need guest workers. We need folks with permits, with work permits that are willing to do this work. We maybe need to re-examine how we're working with individuals, our own citizens, about why this is good work, why this is work that has a lot of value, and that you might want to go into the caregiving services. But I don't know that you can blame that right at the moment on the big, beautiful bill.
Well, and I'll also add, you got to get creative. You
Yeah.
do. I
Yep.
have made friends with nursing students. I've
Yep.
made real good friends with Hudson's Paras.
Yep.
I form those. I have to do that as a mom because that's where I recruit from in terms of some of our in-home supports. I'm not saying it's perfect. They aren't always great, but it is some help, and I'll take some over none. And I
Yeah.
won't sit and say, well, the system's broken. I can't get help. Oh, well. Mm-mm. I have to do more. And it does provide a huge challenge. We do have definitely a in-home nursing caregiver crisis. We do. I don't see that going away. I don't see
No.
that going away or getting better even just because of this bill. It existed before. It's just there is risk that it may get a little worse temporarily.
I mean, all jobs that are in that lower echelon, and by the way, the more we raise the hourly rate, the more everything else is going to cost. I mean, I don't know the answers to those either. We got above my pay grade. One other thing I might mention too is that we have to make sure we have a very clear care plan, that the expectations are reasonable, that you realize that a caregiver is not going to do things exactly the way that you do them, but it's okay. And so that the employee that you're hiring to provide care for your loved one wants to stay, right? So,
Yes.
and sometimes we have a disconnect in the communication between the parent and the hired individual about what is, first of all, realistic. What are those expectations of that job, especially given what the market rate is now for home health aides on a private pay basis as well as on a government paid basis. There's really an important key that it's often missed, is that communication about what is the care plan, what is realistic, what is their training level, how much training do you have to give them, and then making it an environment that's clean, safe. I mean, that means, like, if your house is cluttered and dirty and you've got 5 dogs and you wonder why you have turnover on a home health aide, I can tell you exactly why you have turnover.
I mean, we make our nurses dinner every single night. They're part of our family. We
Exactly.
get them snacks. I'm like,
Exactly.
what soda do you like to drink? I'll provide it.
A
We
lot of
want
families
them to
provide,
stay.
yeah, mileage
Yeah.
reimbursement is a big thing.
By
And
the way,
to,
you can pay for mileage reimbursement from an ABLE account.
yes, you
Yes.
may.
Many people know
Yes, you
that.
can.
Yes,
Yes, you can.
making
I'm
sure that
gonna
if you're asking that caregiver to take your loved one out for an outing, that you provide the funding for their meal, for their movie ticket.
From an ABLE account.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly, exactly. So there's a
Whatever
good,
resources you have.
right,
Absolutely.
whatever resources you might have.
Exactly. I mean, it's a
Um,
work environment. And I think that it's, even though it's your home, I
Yep.
think what I'm hearing is that you make it a pleasant work environment, a good place to be, somewhere that they want to spend time and do meaningful work. Right.
And have
So,
realistic expectations about what they can do. I would
yes.
echo Kacy too. Talk to everyone when you're looking for a caregiver. We assist people with caregiver searches all the time at National Care Advisors. If you're engaged in a church, if your child goes to school,
Mhm.
talk to those aides at school. They often like to moonlight on weekends and evenings. Absolutely, college campuses where you've got nursing
Yep.
students, physical therapy students, special ed students, they make great caregivers. Now, you're going to have turnover, but you're going to have turnover anyway, right?
Yeah.
And also your case managers, and if you're engaged in any of the nonprofit agencies, they often will know, hey, somebody, moved on, and now there's the great caregiver that's available. You want to be first in line to interview that caregiver and hire them. It is. I'm not saying it's easy. I
Not
absolutely
easy. It's not
acknowledge
easy.
it's a huge problem. By the way, it's a huge problem worldwide. Yeah, and
Yes.
it's going to continue to be a big problem here until Congress figures out our guest worker and our work permit situation, however you want to say that. And at this point, I'm very frustrated with our Congress on both sides, to be honest, why they have not come up with an acknowledgement of what is the best way to get those workers in this country if our own citizens don't want to do the jobs.
On that note, I want to also pivot to this, Michelle, if you're okay with it, because there's a comment specifically or a question for you and all estate
Yes.
planning attorneys in the special needs space,
Yes.
which you are very good at.
Yeah. So
So I want to do that, but first I also wanted to say that based on Anne's point, it is incredibly imperative that families, again, do advocacy and learn who your local organization is with your local Congress people. And I'm talking about state representatives and legislators or senators. In my state and every state out there in the US, there is a Developmental Disabilities Council. It is federally funded, and that is your in. That is where you tell your story. Those are who the people that talk to those legislators on a regular basis. And by the way, those meetings are open and to the public. You do not have to commit, because I know some families fear committing to a time frame. You don't have to commit to any kind of regular thing. Just know that it exists and meet those people, understand who they are and what they do, so that when you need to tell your story because some legislation impacted your family, you know where to go to tell that story. It's very, very important you do that. Okay, Michele, so this is from an estate planning attorney in Central Kansas. Hi, that's where I live. So yeah, I mean, I'm not in Central Kansas, but I'm in Kansas.
You're in Kansas.
What impacts do the bill have on special needs trusts that you have seen, and what do you hope to see from estate planning attorneys you send families to in response?
Yeah, I think that one of the big things is that for me, it doesn't impact how I draft a trust, but
Right.
what it does impact is the allocations as to how much that special needs child should receive. I see this all over the map where um, if a child is in a group home and they're on Social Security and Medicaid and have the parent perceives that all of the child's needs are met by government services, and so I'm not going to leave them anything. And what I tell that parent is that that is a huge mistake because they are doing way more than they think. Like when there's a gap, when there's an emergency that happens, they're doing active case management. They're doing way more than they think. And so please don't do that. And so, and then we have the other extreme where people will leave everything to the special needs child. Now, I don't think that that's a bad place to start. So rather than starting from in equal shares among all the children, think about prioritizing the needs of someone who cannot meet their own needs themselves. And so that's where I think the biggest change has to come from is how we advocate for a child with disabilities and help a parent make good decisions as to what that looks like. And this is where I don't sell financial products, but this is a great reason to keep life insurance, where that's something that I talk about, like super funding is kind of what I talk about. That yes, you can start from a base plan of keeping things equal if you would like, but then have this extra, have this life insurance policy pay into their special needs trust without taking away from the other children. Now, of course, that depends on what you can afford. And there's different types of life insurance. There's some that are, from very affordable, which the benefit rarely pays, versus something that's more permanent in nature, but very expensive. You don't want to have to eat, macaroni and cheese all the time because you're worried about affording the life insurance. So yes, it has to make good fiscal sense, but there are
I
some
would say
key.
early too, early planning, because you
Yes.
can't wait and come in at 60 and expect that you're going to be able to afford a life insurance policy that can boost
Yes.
a special needs trust. So it's not too early, even if you don't have any, your finances, as we all usually our careers kind of go, and you start to make more money later in life, and other children, get through college and all of that. And now we're going to plan, and the last kid's out of college. No, no, no. Please find your team early, have the conversation. You can adjust it every year. We always
Yes.
say once a year, revise it. But some of the tools that Michele was just talking about, one of the things that I see as a problem, and certainly this is what's happening right now with the big beautiful bill and everything else, is made it even more important to start early, start your planning process, have a field to define what your vision is, figure out what the resources are. There's only 3 ways to do this. Unpaid family time and energy, love, family money, private money, and government resources. We'll always have all 3, but it might be a different ratio depending on what happens with our
Yes,
government.
absolutely. So flexibility, visit early, visit often, don't set it and forget it. And these are things that existed before this bill. I think that just the biggest advantage of this bill is that people are talking about it, right? And we're having these conversations. So we're out of time. And I just wanted to absolutely thank you both for spending the time with us and sharing your wisdom and your knowledge. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you to you both. I'll let everyone know when this video is posted on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions that were unanswered during the webinar, you can email us and we can try to get back to you.
One
And
quick last thing, Maddie, I want to
Mhm.
also stress the Academy of Special Needs Planners is a fantastic place for families to find qualified estate planning attorneys and financial planners in their area. National Care Advisors has their own website. They have nurse case managers that cover all 50 states, and you can engage on their website at nationalcareadvisors.com. And please, please, please get involved with your state's DD council. It's very, very important.
Thank you for joining us.